Hello and welcome to the Liverpool Connection Podcast. I'm Daz. I've got Steve with me as always, and today's guest, I'm not going to say his name yet, but he's someone that I listened to musically growing up in my teenage years in Formby, and my mum used to bang on the ceiling to turn the music down. I think by the end of my teenage years, my mum knew every word of the album. He's also the founding member of the End Fanzine, also a author of the book, The Boot Room Boys, and he's part of the committee for Bill Shankly. It is Mr. Peter Hooton.
Hello.
How are you?
Pleased to be. The wonders of modern technology.
I know, it's crazy, but
I understood every word you said.
But this is how it's going to be for a while, is, doing the Zoom thing.
This is how I talk to my family.
Yeah, exactly.
We live in the same house.
Well, I'm going to delve into it. I've got kind of two questions to begin with. What does Liverpool Football Club mean to you? And then what was your first Anfield experience?
Yeah, to me, Liverpool Football Club, it's in my blood really. My granddad was born opposite basically the Cop, he lived in Anfield. So my very first memories were of going to my nan's and seeing the ground, They were my very first memories. So I think it's a family tradition, so it's, my granddad was born in 1880s. So when Liverpool were established in 1892, he became a fan straight away. I don't know whether he supported the other team, the foundation was St. Domingo's, then went on to become Everton. So I don't know the history, but he was certainly always a Liverpool fan from what I know, that, he was going to the match from the start, and he was also a footballer. And I've got photographs of him from 1906-1907 season, winning the Anfield and Kensington Cup, an old sepia type photograph. So my earliest memories were of Liverpool, and my dad lived, obviously, they moved from Granton Road, which was opposite the Cop, a bit further along, if anyone knows Anfield, just about 200 yards down Oakfield Road towards Breck Road. And they lived in a street called Hay Street. So I used to go to my nan's on a Saturday, then walk to the end of the street to meet my dad coming back from the match. Because from 62, he was a season ticket holder at Anfield. When they built the new Kennan Road, which became the St. Enory stand, there's now the Kenny Dalglish stand, he had a season ticket from the very first season it was open. So my earliest memories was 4 and 5. We were going to the end of the street. You'd never allow it nowadays, but I'd go to the end of the street and go past, go against the flow of people coming from the ground till I saw my dad, and then we'd walk home together, So they were the earliest memories, and I think my granddad took me to the first match, but it was a reserve game. And I remember it because if you got a season ticket in those days, the reserves played at Anfield when the first team were away. So you get in to the ground for a reserve game with your season ticket, and you didn't have to pay. It was just an added bonus, So I remember being at this ground where there was no one there hardly, and just remember sitting on a crash barrier. And the reason I remember it is because I fell off the barrier and split my head open, so it was my first experience of Anfield was pretty painful. I don't think I had stitches, but I had a bad cut on my head, So that was my first recollection. But my dad then started taking me. He was the mate of a fella called Ray Shelley. And Ray Shelley's dad had been the trainer in the 40s and 50s. His name was Albert Shelley. But even in the 60s, Albert Shelley was one of those people who was part of the club. So even though he wasn't getting paid anymore, he was retired, he'd still go in and fix the boots, and just do odd jobs, painting or whatever. But Shankly loved him, you see. So even though he wasn't on the payroll anymore, they still let him come in, you know, and he was the odd job man, you know. So we get tickets. And I always remember the tickets were in the obstructed view of the main stand. And I don't know if anyone remembers, the obstructed view was right next to the cop, but also right next to the boys' pen. So we were sitting in the obstructed view and there'd be no one around. In those days, every game wasn't sold out. You know, it was like an obstructed view. You'd only be you and no one else really, you know, because you had a stanchion in front of you. But they're the tickets we got. So I always remember first games, and my dad said he took me to Liverpool Newcastle, where Tony Haley scored a hat-trick, and also where Gary Sprake threw into his own net. But I can't really remember the games, you know, I mean, I was a youngster, but all I remember from that period was being fascinated with the cop. So I'd look to the side and you'd hear the songs coming, and I was thinking one day I'll be big enough to go in there, you know.
What does the club mean to you, you know, on an everyday basis?
Well, I think you know, it's part of the fabric of my life, really. You know, I think if someone was to say when I was a kid, what do you want to be, a footballer or or in a band, I would have said footballer every time. You know, it's interesting that sometimes you meet players now and they have the opposite. They'd rather be in pop music or whatever. You know, I think they're mad. You know, I think obviously playing football, and I always remember from an early age, that's all I ever wanted to do, play football. And so I'd be out. I lived by, I was brought up by AC Racecourse, which is a famous racecourse in the UK, which has the Grand National, you know. So I wasn't particularly interested in horse racing, but I was just interested in every time I had the chance, I'd go to the park and play football, morning, noon and night, you know. And it wasn't really organised in those days. You know, now kids have got samba goals and referees and playing from 7 years old in organised games. Ours were just mass kickabouts, and that's what I loved about them. And I think that's where no one was coaching you. There was no one saying, don't do this, don't do that. It was all natural ability. I think a certain amount of that's been lost from the game, you know. But if you to say what football means to me is, you know, it's everything. But what Liverpool Football Club, it's you know, it is my life. You know, it's like I'm just obsessed with it. You know, and even it's like a drug, really. I think you try and get away from it, but it always drags you back. The only time I haven't been to Anfield really since the 70s was during the Graham Souness period, when he did the interview with the Sun. And he decided that I wasn't going to go until, not had anything particularly against Souness, because as a player, he was one of my favourite ever players. But I just thought symbolically you can't do that and be Liverpool's manager. So I stopped going the game, I boycotted the game, you know. But that's the only time I've ever stopped going, really. Obviously, when I was on tour in the early 90s, we toured Europe and the States. So I'd miss some games, but our tours tended to be from May to September, and there was usually a reason for that, you know, and that was because that's what we wanted. There was 3 Liverpoolians in the band and 1 Evertonian, which I think even realistically, even Evertonians would admit that's probably the ratio for our generation, you know. But for youngsters, it's probably even more now, you know.
And I also want to talk about, get a bit of background on the fanzine, how that started.
Yeah, well, there was one of my mates there was a thing called the Mod revival, just after punk. Well, 79, there was a film called Quadrophenia, which you might or might know about. But it was about mods and rockers, and it was in the 60s. If you ever look at footage, you know, there was 2 tribes, and it was One were mods who were like working class, dressed up, and the others were rockers, leather jackets. The mods all had scooters and all dressed in Italian suits, and they looked to me the sharpest, you know. The rockers, I don't know what it was about rockers, but even when I was a kid, I didn't like, you know, that style, you know. I was always attracted to the mod image. So this lad did a mod fanzine called Time for Action about this mod revival. So that was about 79, 80. So he was only 17 at the time. It's like Phil Jones, his name was. So I thought, if he can do that, why can't we do one? I keep on seeing people who go to football matches, but I keep on seeing them at concerts as well. Whether it was the Specials, the Beat, the Jam, the Clash, you know, all groups like that. So I'd see the same people. I think there must be because in those days, it was either, if you had a fanzine, it was all about music. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to incorporate music and football. And a lot of people tried to put me off, said, you won't get people from the match buying that, you know, they're not interested, you know. But I wanted it to be funny, but to never have a joke in it, if you know what I mean. Because at the time, people sold student rag mags on the street, which were full of like jokes and that. And people used to find them hilarious, but I didn't. Because, you know, I didn't find the jokes funny, and most things I found funny were observational humour. You know, and I wanted it to be off the wall, really, you know, so almost Monty Python-ish, you know, of like some things that were bizarre. So we just, when we started the fanzine, it was a deliberate attempt to target people who were interested in music, but also had an interest in football and fashion. And it was targeted not just at Liverpool fans, it was targeted at Everton fans as well. So we used to sell it at both grounds, you know, and it became very successful, but only in an underground way. We could never have had it published by a proper publisher, because they would have been sued straight away, because every sacred cow the Liverpool as a city held in awe, we attacked. You know, we just attacked everything. And a few people got upset by it, but we'd attack like local DJs and local personalities and all that type of thing. But, you know, it was a very punk ethic, really. It was year zero as far as we were concerned. And people started then writing in about what clothes do you wear at the match? And we used to have letters and we just dismissed them. And we just ridiculed everyone. And it was like, people probably thought, who the hell are these to ridicule? But I remember John Peel said, I wrote to him. And I wrote him a pretty, wasn't an obnoxious letter, but I thought it was witty, just telling him where he was going wrong with his musical tastes. You know, which is like, for someone who's teenagers to be doing that, John Peel read it and went, who the hell are these guys? It's like that, it's like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where they're getting pursued by the detectives and they go, who are these guys? You know, over the ridge, you know, who are they? You know, we should have lost them by now. And people had that same reaction, who the hell are these to be attacking, you know, us left, right and centre. But Peel said that it was exactly the type of letter that made him want to meet us, because he thought, I want to, he said he wanted to knock around with us. So we actually met him, and that's when it became, it was in the New Musical Express, which was a well-read music weekly. But also when Peel started promoting it, it just went nationwide, you know. So then we had all sorts of different fans from other teams saying, we wear this, we wear that, you know. But we, in the letters column, we just ridiculed them, you know. So whatever they wore, and it wasn't us saying we were fashionable, we had an ins and outs column. So even things that were fashionable in Liverpool would be immediately in the outs column, just to cause mass confusion. It's a bit like politics in America now. Everything's done to cause mass confusion, you know. So, but people liked it, and you could see people in pubs before and after the game reading it and laughing and that. But, you know, I'm pretty proud that there was never one joke in it, and there was never really a stereotype in it. There might have been a few, but there was never, we tried to, you know, we were anti-racist, anti-sexist, but the people will find things in there, go, oh, look at that, you know, so there might have, some things might have slipped through, but I think genuinely we were trying to be a radical alternative to the stereotypes. You know, we predicted, only as a joke, but in the mid-80s, Liverpool was high unemployment, Thatcher was in government, the docks were on the decline because of containerisation. So Liverpool was a bit of a post-industrial waste ground, but we had one of the characters in it was Joe Wag, who was supposed to be like a really streetwise scallywag who knew what to do on the street, and he was predicting in his manifesto that Liverpool would become a tourist city. But what he meant was it would become the new Amsterdam, and there was a reference obviously there to people, because everywhere you went in Liverpool in them days, people were smoking pot everywhere you went. People were listening to Genesis, Pink Floyd, Simon and Garfunkel. You know, it become a really, even though these were people from the council estates, from the working class, they weren't hippies as such, but they took over that mantra of, unfortunately, that led to, in the 80s, to heroin epidemics in the city, which I think was it really did damage the youth of the city.
Yeah, well, especially like the glue sniffing as well. I remember all that. It was bad time. But with the fanzine, I love how you describe the doorstep interviews. Where you would just show up at their place.
Yeah. Well, we just thought we took it from. I went to see the Clash. I went to the 1981 European Cup final against Real Madrid, Liverpool, and I was with a load of my mates and that. And we didn't go and see anything in Paris. You know, all we were doing was looking for like good bars or sports shops that had stuff that we couldn't get in England. You know, so I wanted to go to the Palace of Versailles. You know, I wanted to go to the Louvre. I wanted to go to a few places. So I decided to go back in September. So the match was in May. And a few months later, we went back to the same hotel by the Saint-Lazare station in Paris. Same hotel. And then I'd read in the enemy, the Clash were playing, so I thought, I'll go and find out where they're playing. Thinking, well, it might be 5 miles across the city or 10 miles. I was still going to go. And when I got to Paris, it was round the corner. It was just unbelievable. It was literally a 5-minute walk to the Mogador Theatre where the Clash were on for 7 nights. And they were playing with the Beat, who were an English, like, Scottish, reggae-ish band. And also a fella called Pete Wiley from Liverpool. So I thought, I'll go down during the soundcheck time just to suss it out and see if I can see anyone that I knew, you know. Anyway, I get to the stage door and no one's stopping me. I can hear the Clash soundchecking. And this fella, as I walk in, went, "Are you with Pete Wiley?" And I said, "Are you from Liverpool?" He went, "Yeah." He said, I'm the Clash's tour manager." I said, "Oh, I'm from Liverpool as well." He said, "Who do you support?" I said, "Liverpool." He said, "Are you coming tonight?" I said, "Well, if I get a ticket, yeah." He said, "I'll get you a pass." So he gave me a pass. And then I was in. So for 7 nights, and it was a bit of a catalyst, really. Everybody thought I was with Pete Wiley. Everyone thought I was part of his entourage, you know, but I wasn't. I don't think I knew him. And when I was, I went to see the Clash 6 out of the 7 nights. Wow. I wanted a night off just so I could look forward to the next night, if you know what I mean, instead of just doing the 7 straight ones. And it was during the Sandinista period, and they had a graffiti artist called Futura, who, as they were playing, he would be doing graffiti behind them, like a mural, and it was absolutely brilliant. You know, and the Clash were like, they were years ahead of the time. You know, they were incorporating hip-hop beats. If you listen to the Magnificent Seven and tracks like that, it was, you know, they were using hip-hop beats, you know, years before acid house, really, you know. And it was fantastic, but I became part of the Clash family almost. And I took photographs backstage. In a way, that was another catalyst for the end, because I thought, I've got all these photographs. I pretended I did an interview with them. All I did was I listened to this French radio who were interviewing Strummer and Mick Jones, and just jotted down a few notes how they danced, you know. So that became another reason why I've got this photographs of them and a bit of an interview. Yeah, I've got to get something out. So that was another catalyst for the end. So that was, I think, in addition number 2. But when we were in Paris, I was in the dressing room one night at the Clash, and we weren't there. But, you know, it was before the farm existed, so we weren't used to things. But they had a table full of fruit and veg, and, you know, and sandwiches, and ale, and everything, beer. You know, it was one of those things where it was just like he was staring at it, looking at it for ages, you know, going, that's unbelievable. Man. Anyway, I took a banana, thinking, oh, I'll help myself to a banana. Like, and as I was eating, you know, I was peeling the banana, Strummer and Mick Jones walked in with the guitars on the back, and they went, and I was sorry about this, boys, said, I was starving on that. And he went, we're the Clash, you take what you want. And I just thought, what a brilliant, you know, that it wasn't a front. Everything he said, everything he did. And on the last night, there's a brilliant story that the last night, after the last night, they wanted to go to a nightclub in Paris. So they had all these Parisian punks with them. They were like the Mick Jones and Joe Summer, like the Pied Pipers, walking around the streets of Paris looking for a club that had let them in. And they'd had a few recommendations, but they had 40 to 50 punks with them, or wastrels from Paris, you know, and me and a few others. And we were all walking along, and every club they went to, they'd say, can we get all these people in with us? These are all our friends. No, the Clash can come in with all. And we went to about 5 clubs until they let everyone in. That's what they were like. And I thought, if you're going to be in a band, be in a band like that, you know, a people's band. And that's what they were, you know. It was incredible stuff, you know.
Well, I know the Clash were very anti-establishment, you know, and the ethos of you know, against Thatcherism. With the farm, like your first album, Spartacus, right?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So what was your mindset? Like, were you, you know, thinking a bit about the Clash with your song structures and your lyrics?
Yeah. Well, originally when we started, we were doing a lot of John Peel sessions, and that's where we got recorded. And that actually came out as Pastures Old and New before Spartacus, but it wasn't really our release. It was a company that we'd signed some mad deal with. You know, one of those deals where they offered you £800 for your songs forever or something, you know. We got out of it later on, but it wasn't really our album. We never really put they were basically BBC recording sessions, you know. And I wanted the amalgamation of the Clash and the specials, and so it was a bit Scar influenced as well, you know. Similar to the way that the Clash did Police and Thieves, which was obviously a record from Jamaica, and they copied it, you know. So it was all that type of element, you know. But about '86, I went to see Big Audio Dynamite, who were Mick Jones's new band, you know. Because famously, he got sacked by the Clash, didn't he? Even though he was one of the founding members, you know. But you know, that was a traumatic period. But when Big Audio started, they had Don Letts with them, and they were using hip hop beats, and they were like, it was a continuation of Magnificent Seven, really. You know, I think someone was more rock and roll. I think Mick Jones was open to new ideas, you know, of dance music, really. You know, and we went to see Big Audio Dynamite in Liverpool, a place called The State, and I just heard it, and it was all samples from spaghetti westerns. And it was absolutely blew me mind, you know. And they were using samplers in '86, you know. And I thought, that's what I want the farm to be, you know, to be emulating that, you know. But we couldn't afford a sampler at the time. Samplers were like a few $1,000, you know. You couldn't afford them at the time. We couldn't anyway. So it took us a couple of years before we could actually get the money together to buy them. And they were like, now anyone can sample off probably an iPhone or whatever, you know. But in those days, to take a sample off a record, you know, it was a complicated business. You had to have someone who knew what they were doing, you know. Always remember we played in 1991 with Big Audio, we did a tour of the States. And we also had another group on with us called Downtown Science, who were a New York hip hop band, you know, but one of the rhythm masters from Downtown Science was a lad called Sam Severs, or Sam Seaver, and he produced loops for all sorts of different groups, but one in particular, Third Base, who were a New York hip hop, and they were fantastic. And we'd used a few of their samples, you know, from the drum loops. And that. So when we were doing a sound check one day, I think it might have been in Houston actually. I remember it was somewhere in Texas, I'm sure it was like. And Sam was listening to our sound check and he comes up and I'm by the microphone and went, I recognise a few of them beats. And we knew what was coming. We thought, oh no, here's the lawyer's phone number. Like, but he went, oh, I'm flattered that you're using them, man, you know, I'm flattered, you know, thanks a lot for using them. And I said, well, how much do we owe you? And he went, no, forget it. You know, it was the Clash style, you know, just, you know, because they weren't, it wasn't like, drum beats were different, and obviously it wasn't part of a song, it wasn't a guitar riff or you know, or a melody, it was drum loops, and obviously he'd got drum loops from other places as well himself, you know, so that was all part of the game, you know.
Yeah, you couldn't probably pull that one off today without the lawyers. No chance. They'd be knocking down your door.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. Well, someone did get in touch, a group called Maltronics got in touch with us. And I think he was originally from New York, and he'd seen an advert in the UK, but he was living in the UK then. And he saw this advert, and it was for Stepping Stone, we'd used the drum loop. And it was from, he said, you've used my drum loop, Maltronics, and that. And so one of my mates went on a hip-hop fan board in America, in New York, and said, do anyone know where Maltronics got their drum loop from for this particular track that he was saying we were using? And he waited months and months, and someone came back with the track he got it from, which was a 70s track. So when our lawyer just said to him, well, you know, fair enough, we've used that, but we'll have to inform the lawyer of this artist that you used it, and we never heard from him again. You know?
That's the way to do it. Altogether now, you know, is an anthem. I want to know, like, the lyrics behind it, and what they actually mean to you.
Yeah, it was something that I'd always wanted to tell people about this incident that happened in the First World War, when on Christmas Day in 1914, British and German troops stopped fighting and basically fraternised in no man's land. So it was like, for me, it was to be, I wanted to publicise that event, you know. Mm-hmm. Now, we had a song called No Man's Land, and some of the verses came all together now, you know. But we didn't have a chorus, proper chorus. But when dance music came along, and we started incorporating drum loops and various things, it slowed the track down. And because we were going to Ibiza and to all these raves everywhere, you know, it just came to me one day in a rehearsal all together now, you know, in No Man's Land. It was just like, I think I was singing something else at the time, but then that came to me, and it was just perfect. Our guitarist had always said, I think you should put the lyrics of No Man's Land to Pachelbel's Canon. He called it the wool advert, because in the UK, Pachelbel's Canon had been used for lots of different things, but it was particularly a wool advert, advertising British wool, believe it or not. Buy British wool, you know. And he remembered that as a kid, the advert. So he said, I think it'd really work with the lyrics to No Man's Land. And so we tried it one day and it fitted perfectly, you know. But I was trying to get across to people that, you know, all the jingoism and nationalism of what went on in the First World War, there was another side to the war. There was a human face to the war, you know. There was a different, people have been told the war will be over by Christmas, you know. I think there's some brilliant books on the First World War, but I still think in Britain in particular, there's still this idea that it was this glorious war in the trenches and, horrific, but had to be fought, and really, if you really analyse it, Europe, they sleptwalked into that war. There was no real reason for it. And the only reason you can get down to the basics is that the British Empire was feeling threatened by German industrialism. And that's what it boiled down to, that they thought the Germans want a navy, they shouldn't have a navy, we've got the navy. It's all that Britain rules the waves, rule Britannia nonsense, but because we were coming into a mechanized age, you had a warfare that was based upon the 19th century. That's what the British Army wanted, cavalry charges and, and they were dealing with machine guns, So I wanted to tell the human face, but also the fact that the people fighting on the German side and the British side, and eventually the Americans when they joined the war, were exactly the same. They were the working class of the country is fighting for for imperialism, really. And I think the song means certain things to certain people, but I meant it as a peace song, and I wrote the lyrics probably in a period after John Lennon got shot, because that's the first time I started writing. I was so upset when John Lennon got murdered. The whole world was, but I think in Liverpool we felt as if, he was our brother. That's what we felt like. He was ours. And he campaigned for peace, and it really affected me. So I started writing my thoughts down on paper, which were probably early songs, but they were just thoughts, really. And during that period, I read about this truce that wasn't really publicised when you studied the war, at school. It wasn't really publicised, because it's the one thing the people who write about war and who write about, the victors write the books, don't they? But they didn't want you really to know amongst it, because it was, we don't talk about that, that was when they fraternised with each other, And the leader of, there was someone who started the Labour Party in the UK, Keir Hardie. When he found out about the truce in 1914, he thought that was the beginning of the workers revolting, both sides against the generals, Because the generals, and there's some brilliant books about the First World War, and if you really read into it, the generals were from a certain elite class, and they basically treated the troops as cannon fodder. I mean, there's no doubt about that, and I think they felt as if they were fighting a war like they'd have fought in Africa against, unarmed people, where they could just do what they wanted and the cavalry had charge. And then they were fighting, a very sophisticated army with modern weapons, but they were still fighting as if it was the American Civil War or something, with, it was just a ridiculous way to fight, and if you look at, there's a book by Adam Hochschild called To End All Wars, and if you read that, it opens up the real truth about what went on and the class divisions within the army, and there's General Haig, who was regarded as the butcher of the Somme on the British side. He was from Sandhurst. That was the cavalry, academy, and basically all he wanted was the troops to go over the top, to wipe out the German defences, and then the cavalry would charge and take all the glory. That was all it was based on. It was absolutely ridiculous. So I think that element of humanity during that 1914 truce, that should be the thing celebrated about the First World War, not the death and destruction. I think it should be elements of human nature, because people started fraternising, people started talking to each other, people swapping photographs, swapping presents. And there's some brilliant first-hand descriptions of, that people meeting each other in the trenches and that. And along the front, it was a 500-mile front. There wasn't a truce everywhere, but along great advances of it there were, And there's at least 3 or 4 recorded football matches, of mass just getting the ball out and playing and that. So I just think, as symbolism, it's absolutely brilliant. So that's what I wanted the song to represent. In fact, in America, I think Groovy Train came out first in the States. Groovy Train got to number 41 on the Billboard. It was on heavy rotation on MTV. It was number 1 on the modern rock charts and was doing really well, But then they tried to re-release All Together Now, but it had been the other way around in England. It had been, in the UK, it had been Stepping Stone, Groovy Train, All Together Now. But in America, it had been, All Together Now had been released on import, really. So that had done the rounds of the radio station. Then it was Groovy Train, which was nearly a hit. Then the American record company tried to re-release All Together. So it didn't really work properly, but I still look at the stats, we still got a few listeners on Spotify in the States,
It's probably me.
Sorry?
It's probably me.
Yeah. Texas is a big area for us.
I still have the cassette.
It gives you the different cities as well,
Yeah, I think I still have the cassette.
Oh, the cassette, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a museum piece now,
Yeah, it is. It goes with me trainers as well, so.
I can see them all in the background there. I'm just having a look at the, because you've got something, obviously Spotify for artists, so if they can establish you in the group, they'll give you all the stats, and I'm just looking on the phone here where Texas is, if it comes up. It's taking a bit of a time to load, but yeah, you can see which cities are listening to and which areas. I think the UK is obviously our best, but it's logged me out, so I can't get into it at the moment.
Well, it was great back then anyway, because I know the farm, you lads got remixed a bunch of times, so that kind of helped put you on the map too, on like the acid house scene as well, which must have been cool. But to be put in the modern rock category in America, that's quite funny.
Well, that was most indie bands were, weren't they?
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Modern rock stations are still going, presumably. I mean, we thought the modern rock stations were absolutely fantastic, absolutely brilliant. And I think the equivalent to it in the UK is Radio 6 now, which will play new stuff. But I thought the modern rock stations were absolutely brilliant in the States,
Steve, I'm going to bring Steve on now, because I think
Hi,
I've been talking too much. I know Steve's got a bunch of questions for you.
Oh yeah, I always have questions. But Peter, first of all, thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure just learning more about your music. Admittedly, I don't know a lot about the music, and so it's been enlightening to hear about it. But one of the fascinating things that I'm learning through this conversation so far is that you've always been a storyteller through your music. You want to tell stories. Obviously, you're very interested in history. A lot of the things you reference. Yeah. A lot of things you referenced about World War I, and that episode, I've read as well. So it kind of is evident that you've always had this capability to write and put your things down on paper. You've had just as successful career as a writer as you has as a musician, writing for 442, the Fanzine, and, being a contributor to, and collaborators for other books. Yeah. So I wanted to bring it kind of forward to the Boot Room Boys. Yeah. It seems that, I know it was published in 2019, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yes. So it seems like
just the end of 2018, but it was mainly out last year. Yeah.
Right. And it seems like with, we talk about technology and the ability to connect from all around the world, there's a new generation of fans and also worldwide who don't really know about Bill Shankly. You know, obviously there wasn't the TV and the radio coverage back then, and so authors like yourself, you know, we had Karen on yesterday, right? Talking about her grandfather. So can you kind of tell us what the decision-making process was to bring that book and to life?
Well, I'd done a book in 2008 called When Football Was Football.
Right.
Liverpool. And it was a series of books. It started off as a generic book, When Football Was Football, about every different club. But that had been a success. So the publisher said they wanted to do the next series were going to be Liverpool and Man United, because he thought they were the biggest teams in the Premier League, you know. So he got on the phone to me and said, will you do this book? And it was mainly a photographic book, mainly photographs from the archive. And it was about the history from 1892 to 1992 of Liverpool. And that wasn't because Liverpool stopped winning the league then. It was simply because when the Premier League was started, they then jointly owned the rights to the photographs.
Okay.
So the Daily Mirror, which is a big publication in the UK, their photographs were owned by them solely until 1992. So that's how we could use them. So I did a lot of research and I wasn't sure how to go about it, but the fella on the end of the phone convinced me that I could do it, you know. And my name was given to them by a Man United fan, actually, called Andy Mitten, who does a fanzine called United We Stand. And that's their United's main fanzine. Andy now is writes for The Athletic and various still does the fanzine, but he was the one who recommended me, you see, because they just didn't want the football history. They wanted a bit of the social and economic history of the city, you know. And I've always been obsessed with history, you're right. I've always been obsessed with history. So I did the book, When Football Was Football, Liverpool. And they'd done a book for every club. Then after that, they did Celtic, they did Rangers, Tottenham, Arsenal, Chelsea. But the best-selling book for the whole of it was the Liverpool one. Now, I think that's because of Bill Shankly. Bill Shankly was photographed in the archive. I'd say Shankly photographs outnumbered Paisley photographs by 5-1, easily. Every opportunity to have a photograph taken, Bill Shankly was there. So he was there with, you know, he was there with politicians, he was there with pop singers, he was there with Red Rum, who was a famous racehorse. He got his photograph taken with Red Rum. So everywhere there was a photo opportunity, Shankly was obviously going, I'll do that, because he was like Klopp is, he was a big personality. Paisley was the opposite. Paisley shied away from the camera. Bill Shankly was attracted to it. So Liverpool was built from 1950 onwards, 59 onwards. Liverpool was built in Shankly's image, really. So this club that had been in the doldrums, really, in the second division, quite happy in the second division because they were still getting very good gates. They were still getting 40,000, sometimes 50,000 at Anfield in the second division, but they were always missing out on promotion to the then first division, which is now the Premier League, you know, the top division. So Shankly was offered the job, and he said he'd only come to Anfield if he was allowed to pick the team. Now, famously, Matt Busby had been interested in the Liverpool job because he was one of Liverpool. He's the famous United manager. But after the war, he wanted to be the Liverpool manager. And it just shows you how history can transform things. But Liverpool board still wanted to pick the team. And Matt Busby wasn't happy with that. So he was offered a coaching role at Liverpool. But he didn't want that. He wanted the manager's job and he wanted to be able to pick the team. So he went to United. When Shankly was offered the job in 59, he said, I'll only come if I can pick the team. So the board of directors who picked the team previously It's just, it seems ludicrous now that could happen, but that's the way it was. So they agreed to that. And I don't think they really knew what they were getting with Bill Shankly. Bill Shankly revolutionised that club. He was a whirlwind. Everyone you've ever spoken to, anyone you've ever read stuff about he was infectious. He always goes on about natural enthusiasm. You're nothing without natural enthusiasm, And you could see he was obsessed with football, totally obsessed with football. And he wanted to take Liverpool. He was so ambitious. In the other clubs he'd been at, Huddersfield he came from, and before that he'd been at places like Worthington and Carlisle and places like that. He'd never done anything really successful, even at Huddersfield, but he had that ambition. He wanted to buy players, and the Huddersfield board kept on saying no, we can't afford them, we can't. Got to Liverpool, and the board started saying the same thing. He couldn't believe it. He thought, I've been sold a dud here. They said they were ambitious. And he wanted to buy Jack Charlton, just recently passed away. He wanted to buy various players. Dave Mackay is another one. And he certainly wanted to buy Ron Yeats and Ian St John. And the board kept on saying, no, we can't afford it. No, we can't afford it. So he was really disillusioned, Shankly, in the early days. And he kept on phoning Matt Busby up. And Matt Busby would be telling him all the time, whatever you do, Bill, do not leave. Just stick at it. Things will change. Something will happen and things will change. And what happened was, it was Everton elected. Oh my God, something's happened. Symbolic. I hope that's not a symbol for this season.
No, I hope not either.
But what happened was there was an entrepreneur called John Moores, who was famous for something called the Little Woods Pools. It's like the lottery, really. You filled in a pool coupon and spot the ball as well. Where was the ball? Where was the ball on this coupon? And he became a multi-millionaire. When he started a retail business. He was a bit like the Amazon of its time, really. Even though the figures are different, but he was regarded as one of the richest men in sport. He got elected to become the chair of Everton in '61, I think it was. When he got elected chair of Everton, he had shares in Liverpool as well. But he thought, I can't really stay on the board of Liverpool and be the chairman of Everton. Conflict of interest. Fans wouldn't have allowed it, So he nominated the shares to the director of finance at Littlewoods, a fellow called Eric Sawyer. Now, Eric Sawyer was the director of finance at Littlewoods, so that's like literally the director of finance at Apple or Microsoft. So, do you know what I mean? It was that Littlewoods were that big in the UK. They were absolutely massive. So when Eric Sawyer joined the board, him and Shankly got on great. He was a new face. He was a financial expert. People had, all these local businessmen had respect. Oh, he's from Littlewoods, he knows what he's doing, And he started to say, I'm going to back him, Mr. Shankly. He said, what's wrong? He said, we can't buy the players. They won't go over. I think it was £15,000 was the limit they'd go for a player. Ian St John was going to be 35,000. Ron Yeats was going to be over 20. And the board was saying, we can't afford them. It's only teams like Everton who can afford them. They were known as Everton players, So it just shows you how the history has changed. Eric Sawyer came in and said, leave it to me. And he said, at board meetings, they'd say, Mr. Shankly, I want to buy Ian St John and Ron Yeats, and we can't afford them. They're Everton players, Everton. And then Eric Sawyer sit up and say, we should be buying these. If Mr. Shankly wants to buy them, he said, we can't afford not to buy them. And Shankly always says the best signing there ever was Eric Sawyer, because he opened the gates. He opened everything before. So Ian St John and Ron Yeats joining the club transformed the club completely. From being nearly men to nearly getting promoted, to winning the second division, and then within 2 years winning the first division, 63, 64. It was very much like Klopp. Klopp has built his team of the spine, Alisson and Van Dijk, with the missing ingredients. Ron Yates was the towering centre-half, dominating centre-half. He put Tommy Lawrence in goal, St. John, so he had the spine of the team, and it was built around that team. And Shankly, not only was he a brilliant manager, he was a brilliant man. And his philosophy on the game, his philosophy on life, was the philosophy, you know, you'd warm to, you know. If he'd become a politician, he would have swept to power, you know. He was unbelievable. And as kids, I was brought up a Roman Catholic, you know. So everything up to the age of 7, you know, it was all Jesus this, Jesus that in school. But as soon as I got to 7, and I did my first Holy Communion, my first confession, and nothing seemed, it didn't change me. I didn't feel different. It was Shankly who was my inspiration, you know. And we used to hang on his every word, you know. And Shankly was you know, there was a song the Copies sing, Shankly is our king, you know, and when he left, you'll always be our king, you know. Shankly was he was the reason for Liverpool being the club they are today. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
You know, we mentioned yesterday with Karen, it seemed like, you know, her grandfather, he needed the people of Liverpool as much as the people of Liverpool really needed him. And it had, you know, it was a two-way relationship there. It wasn't this, I'm this person and you're subservient to me. It was more of, I need you to be a part of this thing. And I think that really transcends now into how Klopp has also come into the city.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of Shankly's statements was, I was made for Liverpool and Liverpool was made for me. It was the communion of those two things. And really, I'm not sure it would have worked in other clubs. I'm not sure it would have worked at Huddersfield where he was. If the board of directors had agreed to buy St. John and Yates, because he already had Dennis Law at Huddersfield. He already had Ray Wilson, who was playing for Everton, became an England left back. So we had the makings of a good team, but I don't think the crowd was the same. You know, Liverpool was the swinging 60s. It was like a perfect storm. You know, you've seen those famous shots of the cops swaying and singing "She Loves You" and Bert Bacharach songs. You know, Anyone Who Had a Heart and that, you know, which was covered by Cilla Black. And you can see the cop, and it was like, it was meant to be. It was meant to be. It was like Shankly had that confidence, he had that charisma, he had that enthusiasm, and so did the cop. And I think he commented that in the past he'd seen the crowd. And he'd be sitting on the dugout as an opposing manager and see the crowd to the right of the cop. And he said, they just need hope. You give them hope and it'll explode. And that's what happened.
Yeah. I wanted to transition. I know the Spirit of Shankly, that's something that you're a committee member of, or on the committee board. And I recall it started back in 2008, and really as a direct result of how Hicks and Gillette were running the team at the time, right? And so I wanted to ask you a question about when Hicks and Gillette left. Was there this thought process of, do we keep this group going because we have some new American owners, now we need to make sure that they don't screw it up, or let's transition to just being a part of doing some of the charity work that they're doing now? Yeah,
I think a bit of both, really. I think there have been so many people on the committee of the SOS, and the camaraderie was so great that we thought, we need to carry on, because obviously FSG are different type of owners to Hicks and Gillette, but we thought we had to still be critical friends almost, so they've got a lot of things wrong in the past, FSG, and we've been there to say we don't agree with this, so I think it was important that once we had the respect of the hierarchy of the club, whoever they were, that we should carry on to be the voice of the supporters who were unheard, and that's what we've tried to do. the first thing that John Henry did, he got members of the committee, Bill Shankly, together, and he said, without you as an organisation, we wouldn't be here now. He never says it in public,
right.
But he said it to the committee, you know. And I can understand what he's saying there, but I think it was a joint collective effort. So we were on the ground in Liverpool, but things like when Hicks was going to banks in Wall Street trying to get more loans to carry on the ownership, when that was happening, there were people in America spotting them, taking a photograph of them, and it just spread like wildfire over the internet, you know. Mm-hmm. So I think it was a joint effort from all Liverpool fans around the world. We might have been on the streets with the placards, but there were other people on the internet doing brilliant work. And whoever spotted Hicks going into the bank on Wall Street and exposing him, that was the end. I think that was the beginning of the end, because they realised that the power of football supporters is we boycotted the Sun newspaper for years and years since Hillsborough, 89. So it's a good threat almost. You'd only get your bank boycotted by Liverpool fans around the world. It's going to affect your business, isn't it? You know. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where sometimes you think, with everyone around the world on the internet thinking, oh no, some of their opinions are crazy, you know, even on Klopp now, why aren't we buying this, why aren't we buying that? Mm-hmm. But sometimes that is an advantage as well. Mm-hmm. I think the idea was also that, you know, Hicks and Gillette promised a lot and delivered nothing. Mm-hmm. FSG didn't promise much, really. They just said they'd run it better. But we were in discussions with journalists from the Boston Globe, who came over a few times to interview members of the SOS. And they were saying, you know, what they'll do is they'll try this, they'll try tiered pricing at the match. Different, you know, if you're in the middle, halfway line, it'll be more expensive than the side. You know, that'll never work. You can't do that at Anfield, you know. But that's what they did do, you know. Mm-hmm. And then when the ticket prices to £77 come, you know, there's certain things that have happened, the furlough and the staff recently during the lockdown. So there's certain things where the threat of the SOS is still being very positive, really, you know. Yeah. And I think the idea is never to get too close to the corridors of power in the club, but to be someone who they can even say, what do you think of this, before we put it out, you know, so we are acting like almost like a fans forum. Yeah. Now there's certain things that go on that the club would never admit to, but of course. You know, there's lots of battles behind the scenes, and they never come to fruition. Some of them, they never come out to be public because the club have dropped the idea, because we said that won't work and you'll have people on the streets again, you know.
Yeah, it seems like for us out here that are not in Liverpool or are not part of the leadership of the SOS, is that we just see the things that are reactionary from FSG, that they have to go back on, like the furloughs, like the ticket scheme, you know, a few years back. Yeah. And so we're always thinking that, you know, we'd like to see SOS become an actual part of the decision-making process, but you're kind of giving us some insight that you are, or that group is being talked to on many things that we just don't get to hear about here.
Yeah, I think on a regular basis, yeah. And I think, you know, you've got to be careful, because you can't be seen to be, you know, you're in discussions with the club, but you can't be seen to be, you know, in the corridors of power and being, I don't think any of the SOS would be like that, because Karen Gill, you know, she's our president, you know, and the people on the committee, you know, fairly, you know, the trustworthy people, you know, and they're incorruptible, I'd say. You know, I don't think they could be corrupted, because their really interest is the football club, not finances.
You know, you had an interview with the Merseysider where you mentioned when FSG took over that they're really, you know, they're mostly concerned about making money for themselves and then selling it on. Has any of your personal attitudes towards the group changed over these 10 years that they've had the club?
I mean, we all know there's still a hedge fund.
Mm-hmm.
They're there to maximise the profits and that. But, you know, I think they've listened a lot more than Hicks and Gillette, you know. And I think Hicks and Gillette, even though I was vehemently opposed to them, I think the financial crisis, you know, the financial crash really affected them, didn't it? You know, and they couldn't borrow any more money. But the fact that they said that they weren't going to do that, like the Glazers had done at Man United, meant that, you know, we can't believe a word they say, you know, and they were arguing amongst themselves, and it was a really confusing period. And Benitez was in a situation where he was saying, I'm not getting any of the money through, and it was all very, very distasteful, really, you know. But I think the idea of it's be careful what you wish for. I think, you know, people were saying during that period, I wish Dubai had bought Liverpool, but I don't. You know, I don't want a Middle Eastern consortium to buy Liverpool. I don't want that.
I don't either. Yeah, I'm on record for saying that as well. Yeah, I don't want to sell my soul to win something.
You know, we're not arms dealers. You know, we're a football club. You know, we don't. So, you know, Newcastle, recently I did an interview with the Newcastle Fanzine, and they were saying, you know, it still could be on. And I said, well, you know, do you really want that? Saudi Arabia, you know, it's human rights and all, you know. And they would dismiss that and say, oh, well, you know, everything you do, if you go to the shops, you know, but there's degrees and levels of conformity, isn't it? And there's degrees and levels of, you know, I would not personally like to be backed by a consortium from the Middle East, you know.
Peter, quickly before we go, definitely have to mention your executive producer on Shankly, Nature's Fire.
Oh,
yeah. How did that come about?
Oh, that was how did that come about? I think somebody got in touch with Hurricane Films. Hurricane Films is started by our drummer in the farm, you know, and it's been a fairly successful film company, you know. I think one of the lads who used to work at Hurricane Films went on to this other film company called River Horse. And River Horse had done a brilliant film on Joe Frazier. Absolutely fantastic film, you know. And they wanted to do something on Shankly that they thought Shankly hadn't been covered properly by a documentary. There'd been sports documentaries, but they wanted to cover more of his attitude and his philosophy and his thoughts, really, you know. And so they contacted Hurricane Films, said, who do you recommend? And they said, well, Peter's just done this book called When Football is Football. So he's researched Shankly quite a bit, you know. And so that was the recommendation. So unfortunately, though, we did a lot of filming over it. They had a small budget, $10,000 or whatever. That's all they had to make a pilot, you know, like a bit of a pilot, thinking that film companies would come in or BBC would buy it or someone would buy it, and no one would come in. So it was literally on the shelf for 18 months, you know. No one was really interested in developing it, but he kept on persisting. The director kept on persisting, you know, and he kept on writing to people saying, you know, he's an independent film company and they're not getting much help off people. And in the end, someone from BBC Scotland answered him and said, we like the idea of it and we're willing to give you a budget, the money. And they needed the money really for clips of Shankly speaking and also photographs of Shankly. That was the biggest cost, because all the interviews had been done. They'd done that on a wing and a prayer, really. You know, we got interviews in, we got match day footage and interviews with various players, but we hadn't got the photographs or the archive footage. And obviously, some of the footage is owned by Getty and people, and it costs an absolute fortune, you know. So they got the they got the basically the funding of BBC Scotland, and so it was only ever going to be shown in Scotland. You know, it did get shown in Scotland, and the viewer ratings were massive. So that's why BBC in England used it as well. It had we showed it at the Philharmonic Hall for its premiere, and that was great because some of the old team came. Sadly, people like Tommy Lawrence was there, who's passed away, and Tommy Smith passed away. So a few of the old players, and it was the last time they really got together, you know, to see it. And I think I'm proud of the documentary. You know, I don't think it's glitzy. I think it's an honest portrayal of what Shankly was, you know, and what he meant to people. And some people would say, "Oh, there's not enough of Shankly in it speaking," but we've heard all those quotes before. We wanted other people's impressions of what, you know. So that's why it was, you know, that's why I think it had to be the impression people had of Shankly and what he'd done. And Roger Hunt never does interviews. We got Roger Hunt to do an interview. Keegan never does interviews about Shankly, and we got Keegan to do it. So we got Jamie Carragher to do something. And I asked Jamie if he'd asked Steve and Gerrard to do it. And he said, yeah, I'll do it. So we got all people who you wouldn't usually expect to get something for an independent, low-budget production. Because when you see these other productions, well, when Kenny Dalglish's one, or Steve, you know, you're talking about millions of dollars for that production. This was, this started off with 10,000 budget, you know, and they got money. I think they got $120,000 to buy the archive stuff. But that was it, basically, you know. And I mean, I did the research, and I tried to get as many interviews as I could, you know, and it's just great the way Keegan talks about him and the way Roger Hunt talks about him and St. John, and you can see the emotion, you know, and what he meant to these people, you know.
Hey, Peter, through, you know, all your research and being a fan and living there, do you have a favorite player of all time that if someone says, hey, who's the man for you for Liverpool history as a player?
It's a hard one, that, because, you know, it's a really hard one, but I would have said, up until recently, I would have said John Barnes. Everyone picks Kenny Dalglish, but I'm not doing it just to be contrary. But Kenny Dalglish was a very British type of footballer. You know, he played for Celtic. He was an immaculate player. He had intuition. He knew everything, you know. But I don't think he could have played in a Brazil team. I don't think he could have played for Argentina or whatever. He was a very, you know, he fitted Liverpool perfectly. But when I saw John Barnes, when he first came to Anfield, he did things with the ball that we'd never seen before. He did things with football that we'd never seen before. He literally walked towards fullbacks, walked towards them, didn't sprint towards them, just walked towards them and went past them. And it was Brazilian football at its best. You know, he would have walked into any team from any era, I think. You know, I think he was absolutely fantastic. So if you were to ask me before this current team, I would have said Barnes. Now, I would say Virgil van Dijk. Virgil van Dijk is the ultimate footballer, I think. He's now a lot of people say you can't say Virgil van Dijk. He's only won the European Cup in the Premier League. But I can say Virgil van Dijk. I've seen all these players. I've seen Van Dijk now for 2 years, and he's one of the best players I've ever seen. He's certainly the best centre half Liverpool have ever had. And put him alongside Alan Hansen, and no one's scoring, had he? You know, I'd say Virgil van Dijk. The time he's got on the ball, he makes everything look so easy, so nonchalant. But our current team is based around him as the pivot. Everything's based. Take Virgil van Dijk out that team, and it's like Samson getting his hair cut. There's nowhere near as strong, you know.
You know, people don't realize that, like last season, he had the most touches out of all our players, you know. So it just shows you the importance that he's just not the defender, that a lot of stuff runs through his side, you know, and he's picking up passes and distributing. So.
And it's unusual to pick, you know, a player, because I've seen the team since the 70s, so I've seen all the greats and that, but, you know, me top three would be, you know, Barnes, Dalglish and Virgil van Dijk. And people say, oh, you can't, you know, he's got to win more. So, no, I said to my dad, now my dad's been going to Anfield, so, you know, as a season ticket holder since the early 60s, and he went in the 50s paying at the gate, you know. I said, who's the best player you've ever seen? And he said, oh, it's a hard one, but in the end he came out with Virgil van Dijk. I said, is he the best centre-half you've ever seen? Yeah, undoubtedly. Because he's an amalgamation of Ron Yeats, of Alan Hansen, of Lawrenson, you know, players like that. You know, he's an amalgamation, he's everything, you know, and you just know Virgil van Dijk could play up front for Liverpool and be a massive success, you know. So it's not that he's compartmentalised to one thing, I'm a centre-half. He could play anywhere on the pitch, I reckon. He's that good, you know, just, you know.
I mean, he showed those skills when he played at Celtic, how he'd bring the ball out and score goals, right? So on this team, he doesn't have to do that. But, I agree with you on everything you've said about him, for sure.
And I think I did something for a radio station recently. They had to name me best 11. Now, if you've asked me at the end of the season, you know, I'd be saying, oh, not many of the old team are getting the new team. They are the perfect team, you know. But significantly, when I did name me best 11, only Virgil van Dijk got in it. I tried to get Mane in it, but in the end I went for Fowler and Rush. Fowler, the most natural player I've ever seen, and Dalglish behind them, you know. So you can't really... would have loved to have got Mane in there. Barnes, Souness was me holding midfielder. Gerrard on the right, and he'd have to play on the right because he'd be told to play on the right. And Barnes on the left, you know. Then you got Dalglish, Fowler and Rush, you know. And the back, Clements was me goalie. Then it was Phil Neal. I love Trent, but I think Phil Neal, most medals of any Liverpool player. Phil Neal, Van Dijk, Hansen, and Emlyn Hughes. And nearly went for Robertson, because I think Robertson's absolutely brilliant, but I think as a player, Emlyn Hughes transformed Liverpool Football Club. So I think he's got to get in there.
Well, Peter, I know myself and Steve really appreciate you coming on and spending an hour or so. I would love to have you back for part 2, because I want to talk about the Beatles legacy group, and I also want to talk about the Casual documentary as well. You know, as an Adidas fan, I've got to hear from you, so I'd love to have you back.
Yeah, I mean, you know, fine, you know, sure. I mean, I love doing interviews, so yeah, if you can arrange that. I mean, the Beatles legacy, that's another thing. You know, as chair of the Beatles legacy group, I want the narrative of the Beatles to be more realistic, to be where they come from, which was R&B, America.
I had the pleasure of having lunch with Frida last time I was in Liverpool, and that was excellent. Just me, her, and her grandson having lunch, and it was
brilliant.
You know,
absolutely brilliant. Yeah. I mean, and Frida started to talk more about her time as the secretary of the fan club, and well, she was Brian Epstein's secretary, wasn't she, as well? But you know, for me, it's all about where did the Beatles come from, and obviously. Without R&B, without black music in America, the Beatles would not exist. Right. You know? I think it's important, and I'm going to try and stress that as much as I can. Also, if you look at Mark Lewison's book, Tune In, which I've got a copy here, which is, I don't know if you know about that, but that's regarded as that's the abridged version, 800 pages. There's another one, 1,800 pages. Wow. And it only goes up to 1962. His next one's coming out from 62 to 66. He thinks that might be out in 2025.
Wow.
But if you read that, you know, he traces the family histories of all the Beatles. And without the great hunger, the Irish hunger of the 1840s and 50s, the Beatles their ancestors wouldn't be in Liverpool. Because 3 out of 4 grandparents and great-grandparents from Ireland. So you've got Irish influences, Celtic influences, R&B, America, Black America. It's a melting pot, and without them, you wouldn't create the greatest group in the world, I think that narrative has been lost a little bit,
Boom, history lesson.
Again, I love it. I love history. So
yeah, and we love stories on this podcast. So
well, one of the books that I read when I was about 17, 18, which changed my life in many ways, was Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. D. Brown, about Native Americans. It just changed. I wanted to read more and more, and became obsessed. Even when I was touring in America, I always wanted to go to Dakota. We never got there, but
no.
I just wanted to go to Standing Rock, And obviously there's been disputes with Standing Rock recently, hasn't there? So,
There's been disputes about everything recently, so that's another podcast. Yeah, so we really appreciate your time, Peter, and just appreciate all the stories and insights that you're being able to give, and we look forward to having another session with you soon.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and the one thing you can't dispute is Liverpool are champions of the world.
That's right.
Yeah, nice one, Peter.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right, cheers, Peter.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.